for that, but that is
Glad you
that is the
remembered to tell
reality.
me that. I was gonna forget. So that worked out. All right.
All right. Well, whenever you are, oh, actually, Liz, we're through appropriations and headed to the floor, right?
Yep. We got through Senate Finance today and are headed to the Senate floor in the next couple days.
Yeah, it has to be.
So all the days they have left.
I'll just briefly touch on that too, and then I'll leave you to explain the majority of that when
Great.
you come up.
And Delegate Cole is a co-patron on this because he's the best.
Oh, so, all right. Well, then whenever you guys are ready, uh, we can go ahead and do it.
All right, here we go.
Welcome, everybody. Another THP legislative update, but we got a special edition tonight. It is making the most of your vote, voting reform and RCV. And what does that mean to us? This is something that's not in the usual justice reform realm, but it really is related. And so thank you all for coming out. We're going to learn something new. I'm going to learn a lot from all the wonderful speakers we have coming on later. Two Liz's, Sean, and Colin Cole from More Equitable Democracy, all the way out on the West Coast, is joining us, but most especially one of my true heroes in the legislature, Josh Cole. Delegate Josh Cole is here to kick us off in just a moment. But I do want to just do a couple of, just a little background here. Oh, and Sean, I'm sorry, Sean, I left your name out of that. Sean Barksdale is with us as well. So we're going to have a great cast. Before I let everybody else take over, though, two important things. One, make sure after this, if you're interested in the earned sentence credit budget amendment and making sure that all stays in place, those expanded credits, we're going to do a live separate from this afterwards. So check that out. But tonight we're going to learn about voting. And the reason that's important is because voting rights and justice reform have been inextricably linked in Virginia's history as long as there has been a Virginia's history, or at least a justice system in Virginia. Right after the Civil War ended, the Vagrancy Act immediately made a felony out of basically being a free person of color. And then in 1902, they made it a constitutional disenfranchisement intentionally for reasons of discrimination. In fact, Delegate Gordon said at the time, I told the people of my county before they sent me here that I intended to disenfranchise every Negro that I could and as few white people as possible. That's the history of the way that voting and justice go together in Virginia. And ever since then, it's not just been a mechanism for keeping people without good representation when they're people of color, but also when they're poor. And so this is why this is an important issue and why we want to learn more about it in our community. Because if we don't just want the vote, do not get me wrong. The opportunity to have everybody have their voting rights restored, that's been getting going this year, and I'm so stoked about that. That is huge. I still don't have mine back. It's enormous. But it's not just having a vote. It's having a vote that actually matters. And I truly believe when you hear what we have to say tonight, what everybody here has to say tonight, you'll be interested in this way to make our voices more represented by our votes. And I really think that ranked choice voting and even proportional ranked choice voting beyond that is the avenue to that. So that's enough for me. That's the segue. I'm going to turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Sean Barksdale. Sean.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Taj, for that. My name is Sean A. Barksdale. I am a returning citizen myself. I was incarcerated for 15 years. I just celebrated 9 years home Monday. Thank you so much. Came home and I started a business. My first business is Press for Time Tees, which is a printing business. And I print for most of the justice reform groups, such as the Humanization Project, the ACLU, the League of Women Voters, and many others here in Virginia and abroad. I went on to start a podcast called 10 Minutes of Truth that we deal with and we highlight justice impacted individuals, policies and politics. And that is where I met Liz White, who educated me and many of us on RCV. So without further ado, I know that Delegate Coles, is a little under the weather. So I definitely want to introduce this brother who is a pastor, an ally, an advocate, and he coined the phrase, "I'm fighting for all of us." Delegate Josh Coles, how are you, sir?
Thank you, Sean. I am so excited to be on tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, listen, everyone, I am so excited to be on here tonight just to talk about the importance of voting. Um, As Taj mentioned earlier, Virginia was the birthplace of voter disenfranchisement. It was the place where poll taxes originated, the place where literacy tests came out that tried to block African Americans from not only just voting, but holding public office. I got excited when we got elected last year, and we felt like we had the largest Black caucus in Virginia's history. It's roughly like 33 of us in the entire General Assembly. But we have this, excuse me, nice little device in the General Assembly. And I happened to be looking at it that just went through the history of African Americans in the General Assembly recently. And in the late 1800s, at one time, there were 50 Black members of the House of Delegates. That's literally half of the membership of the House of Delegates were Black before Jim Crow came into play. And what we have noticed is, and I tell young people this all the time, if your vote really didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying so hard to take it away from you. Just a few weeks ago, we passed an automatic restoration of rights constitutional amendment in the House of Delegates for the first reference. And we talked about the history of this particular constitutional amendment and how it was racist in origin. And after explaining that story, only 3 Republicans joined us in voting to pass that constitutional amendment. But as we also look, our governor has enacted a new way of restoring rights to voters. Typically, most of the time, you would request your voting rights be restored to the governor. And in a couple of weeks, couple of months, it would be a process and you would get it restored. Now, the governor has instituted a commission of roughly 3 of his best friends who have taken their sweet time going through these requests, many of which have either one, been denied or never even have any action taken on them. And so I want to encourage each and every person watching on live today that while federal funding has been frozen from the federal government, that includes healthcare, that includes payments. We don't know where a lot of people's jobs, their money is going to come for their jobs, for healthcare, for food. And this all goes back to people showing up to vote. And I want you to be encouraged to know that just because one election cycle has made things so terrible, there's always another election cycle where we have the ability to repair things. Here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we literally have elections every single year. And so we have the ability to make sure that regardless of what happens on the federal level, Virginia is in the right place to protect workers, to protect moms, to protect families, to protect businesses by enacting the right changes by who is in the House of Delegates, who is in the state Senate, who is in the governor's mansion, and all these different positions, all the way down to mayor and sheriff. Your voice is so important. That's why I partnered up with Liz White to make sure we could pass a ranked choice voting measure in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I first learned about this way back in 2018. I was working as a chief of staff for a delegate, and a former colleague of mine who hadn't become a delegate yet stopped by, introduced this bill. My boss carried the bill, and I kind of picked up that same tradition, making sure that we can do that. And if you're asking, well, why is ranked choice voting so important? I may get in trouble by my Democratic colleagues, but we want to make sure that Lottie Dottie and everybody is represented. And so we want to make sure that not just Democrats and Republicans are serving in particular offices, but we want to make sure that other people who may be independent or whatever have you have other opportunities to serve in elected office. And we also want to make sure that our choices are more diverse. The Republicans will deny this tooth and nail and fight us against it, but the proof is in the pudding. The Republicans had ranked choice voting for their primary in 2021. This is how our lieutenant governor became a Black Republican woman because of ranked choice voting. And they may not say that that's what happened, but we have the proof that is literally what happened. And so we have to make sure that we're protecting the votes of everybody, the freedoms of everybody. And that starts by us showing up to vote and making sure we are educated on what's on our ballot. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. And I'm here for any questions or any concerns you all may have moving forward.
Thank you so much, Delegate Coles, for um, gracing us with those fine words. Before we move on, I want to introduce myself a little bit better. Last year in December, about a month ago, I took my entire family to Montgomery, Alabama, to the Legacy Museum. A lot of people have heard of it, a lot of people haven't. But the Equal Justice Initiative has taken and captured in one place from slavery to mass incarceration. There's a particular room that you can go in, and in this room, they have a jar similar to this jar. You might not be able to see it, right? To this jar here. Well, anyway, this jar is full of coins, right? And so when you go into this room, in order for minorities to be able to vote, they had to register. And so they would say, but in this room, it was a jar full of jelly beans. And they would say, how many jelly beans are in this jar? On this particular same piece of paper here, which is how they would register to vote, right? Minorities would register to vote. And they would ask questions like, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? So we see what minorities had to go through during the civil rights era. And so moving along 30 years later, I get caught in some of these similar traps by my own hands, right? But what happened was I lost my right to vote before I gained the right to vote, because by the time I was 17 years old, I already had a felony. And I duped myself even more so, being ignorant. And I said, just like many today, my vote didn't count. But once I became educated, and it took me 22 years to gain those rights back, I did. And the first time I ever voted, I voted with my 18-year-old daughter for the first time, and it was her first time. And it was monumental for me. It was monumental for her moving forward. And then I happened to come across a lovely lady called Liz White on my platform, which is 10 Minutes of Truth. And she began to educate us on RCV, ranked choice voting. And at first, I didn't grasp the concept, but she explained it so well that when I caught it, I understood. And for the minority, let me just explain a little bit before I you, right? Not as the villain, but all right, I'm going to use you for a second. Now, let's say I'm running for board of supervisors, because we're talking about the local level. And Delegate Coles is also my running with me. And we have Taj that is running as well. What happens to the black vote? It gets split, right? So therefore, Taj knows that he only has to focus on one part of the community that will come out and vote for him, correct? So therefore, I get 6%, Delegate Coles gets 6%, Taj wins with 11%. He only has to focus on one part of the community, not the community at large, right? So therefore, what ranked choice voting does is it puts the power back in our hands. It makes our legislators understand that they work for us and we do not work for them. So therefore, now I don't have to kick dirt on Delegate Coles. He doesn't have to throw me under the bus. And our brother Taj has to know that he has to work for the whole community for that vote. So without further ado, I'm not going to get into the intricacies, because of course I'm going to let Liz White begin to explain to us what exactly, how we get to rank choice voting. So without further ado, the executive director of UpVote Virginia, Liz White.
Thank you so much, Sean. What a wonderful introduction. It was such a pleasure to be on your podcast. It was one of my favorite conversations that really connected a lot of dots between the academic math of ranked choice voting and the very real impact it can have on the lives of voters and on representation that reflects Virginia voters and leads to better impact on all issues. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, if Fatima, can you get me? Can you let me share my screen? Can you make me a co-host, maybe? And if not, we'll figure out how to do this without pictures, but it is a little easier. Since Sean promised that I'm going to make this really clear. Let's see. All right, well, we're going to start. And if we get to pictures, we get to pictures. Oh, I think we're good. Let's try again. Here we go. Okay. So we're going to start just by what is ranked choice voting, because I know it's a phrase that started gaining some traction. It's floating around. So maybe you have heard of it and maybe you haven't. And either way, I think you're in good company with a lot of Virginians. So ranked choice voting is just a simple change to how you get to cast your vote that allows better voter experience, better campaigns, and ultimately leads to better, more representative, more responsive government. So all it means for voters is that instead of just showing up and picking your favorite candidate, you get to pick your favorite and then rank some backup choices. So just in case your candidate, the candidate that speaks to you, the candidate that really aligns with your priorities, maybe just the candidate that knocked on your door, if they are not the front runner, you get to cast your vote in a way that is honest and authentic, and you still get to stay in the conversation, even if they don't end up doing well. Here we go. So the goal of ranked choice voting, and this is specifically talking about elections where we're electing one person at a time. There are ways to use ranked choice voting to do like a city council election where you're electing maybe several people at once. But this is going to be specific to a mayor, a legislator, a president. So when you only have one person representing an entire electorate, the best we can ask for, and really the minimum we should be asking for, is that they have the support of at least 50% of the voters. And that's not always true when you have a crowded field of candidates. So maybe you just have a third party candidate in the mix. Maybe you have 8 people running for mayor. And we see this more and more, especially at the local level. And the only way to really break through the noise and make sense of that crowded field and ensure that we're identifying the candidate that the majority of voters support, we need a tool like ranked choice voting. So everyone's going to cast their votes. You get to rank your top choice, second, third, maybe fourth and fifth. It depends on the locality and the ballot design. And that's an option. If there is only one person, 2 people, 3 people on that list of candidates that you support at all to any degree that you can stomach the thought of putting in office, that's fine. That's all you need to vote for. Sometimes this is described as, oh, just rank them all, top to bottom. And I think if you don't like someone, you should not give them your vote in any ranking, in any fashion. So again, you have the option to rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 candidates. We're going to count up all the first choice votes. And if somebody has the first choice votes from over 50% of voters, then we've achieved our goal. Ranked choice voting wasn't needed in that election. Everybody goes home early. But as you get more candidates in the mix, that becomes less likely. So we see city council races where somebody wins with 22%. We saw several mayoral elections this cycle where the winner had maybe 30 or 40%. And as we're going to see as I get into the visuals, maybe that doesn't mean anything bad, but maybe it does, and we just don't have enough information without ranked choice voting. So we're counting up all those first choice ballots. If we get to 50%, we go home early. If nobody gets to 50%, whoever had the fewest first choice votes is eliminated. If you're one of the people who voted for that person, your vote is now going to count for your second choice. And we're going to repeat that process. It's called an instant runoff, just a series of runoffs. And we're going to continue until somebody hits that 50% threshold. And then we know that that more voters than not support that candidate. So I'm going to go through that again with pictures because I'm with Sean. I had to hear this a couple times before I went, oh, okay. So if you don't feel like you're an expert yet, that's okay. So here we go. Let's say we've got a 4-person primary and Turquoise has done pretty well in this primary. They're at about a 44% share of the vote. I think most of us, being used to a traditional first past the post election structure, would look at this and go, yeah, all right, that's pretty good in a four-person race, 44%, okay. But if all we know from this first round of votes is that 56% of voters wanted somebody else. And this could go one of two ways, and we don't know which way that is. One, maybe a bunch of other voters are fine with turquoise. Wasn't their favorite, but they're okay with it. Or lilac and orange and purple might be splitting the anti-turquoise vote. Maybe those 56% of people hate turquoise, and 44% is that candidate ceiling. We have no way of knowing. And if it's the latter, that's a pretty terrible way to run an election. That's not going to be a representative choice for that district or that electorate. So with ranked choice voting, we get to find out more. We're going to eliminate dark purple because they had the fewest first choice votes. And now if you voted for dark purple, your vote's now going to go to your second choice. And it turns out that these, this blue purple family really had some overlap. So a lot of those votes went to turquoise. Turquoise is almost at that 50%. So we're going to keep going. Because again, we don't know. Maybe everybody who voted for orange absolutely hates this turquoise candidate. We don't know. So we're going to eliminate orange. We're going to reallocate those votes. Turns out there's overlap. Turquoise is more in the, not the most scientific of graphs, but let's say in the high 50s. So turquoise has a mandate to lead. Turquoise probably had to build that multicolor coalition by going outside their comfort zone, knocking on doors in neighborhoods they don't usually go to, talking to people who don't traditionally vote for them in an automatic way. So they have a mandate. They're better equipped to do their job because they talk to more people in their district, and more voters feel represented. So even if you voted for turquoise second or third, okay, you got to express your support. You got to have a more nuanced preference recorded. Ranked choice voting is important now. It has been important, but as we all know, and I think it becomes increasingly clear, our politics is so polarized that it often leads to either paralysis or these wild policy swings like we're seeing this week. Our incentive structure is skewed and it makes it a hard system to operate within. The other problem, which really shouldn't be a problem, is that more and more people are feeling inspired to step up and run for office. And that often includes non-traditional candidates, younger candidates, women, people of color who can add to a more accurate representation of their communities. And our system just isn't built to handle it. Our system is built to produce winners with 22%, and that's just no way to run an election. Really quick, just a rundown of where we are in Virginia legally with ranked choice voting. A pilot program passed in 2020 that allows cities and counties to use ranked choice voting for their city council or board of supervisor elections. The locality has the option. Arlington has opted in to use ranked choice voting in their county board primaries and are trying it out in their generals. Charlottesville is going to use it in their city council primaries. Several other localities, including Delegate Cole's hometown of Fredericksburg, are taking steps to have conversations about how it would look in their community, but it's designed to be adaptable for them. And in fact, the bill we're working on now that Delegate Cole is a co-patron on is in the Senate. It's sponsored by Senator Saddam Salim. And that bill tweaks this pilot program to allow for more local flexibility. It adds mayors and school boards into the list of available options. It broadens the language so that independent towns could use ranked choice voting. Sometimes there's independent towns within counties. So it gives, every locality is so different that it gives them ways to adapt RCV should they choose to use it to make sense for them. Really quick, I stole a slide, so I'm going to give them credit. There's a great national organization called Represent Women. as you can tell by their name, they largely focus on achieving gender parity and equality in politics, but they also focus on racial equality in politics and representation as well. So they have this great slide from their report that they did on why ranked voting is good for women and people of color, both voters and candidates. This slide is specifically about women, but these benefits do apply to all kinds of non-traditional candidates. And Sean really beautifully touched on a lot of these. The really good things that ranked choice voting can do is mitigate vote splitting, right? So if you have two candidates in a race who are from the same background, the same neighborhood, the same race, the same religion, the same part of the ideological spectrum, and there's a block of voters looking for that kind of candidate, they don't have to split the vote. That vote will coalesce on one of those candidates, and they don't hurt each other's chances. Delegate Cole and Sean would not hurt each other's chances by being in the race. So you can have more options, more voices, more brain power in the debate, and no one's harmed by that. Also, Sean touched on you don't need to kick dirt on your opponent. In fact, it could hurt you to kick dirt on your opponent, because if Sean goes to Delegate Cole's supporters and tries to tell them how terrible he is, well, he's probably just going to alienate them. Whereas now he or Taj would have the option to say, Delegate Cole is great, and I understand that you support him. Let me tell you why I am also a good choice. I would like your second choice ranking. And that way, if Delegate Cole is the first one eliminated in that primary, they get those second choice votes. They build up their coalition to the 50%, as opposed to having alienated all of them. Those two things together, the mitigation of negative campaigning, which disproportionately affects women and people of color running for office, and the fact that you don't have to worry about the vote splitting, those two things together really are why the data shows that ranked choice voting is a tool that elects a more diverse type of candidate. And I think that that's just huge. We want every community to be accurately represented, because that is how you get responsive government. That is all I have. I'm going to stop my share. Okay. That's all I have. I'm going to hand it back to you, Sean, but I'm sticking around. So if there are questions, I'm thrilled to take them.
Thank you so much, Liz, for that in-depth, detailed explanation to RCV. To understand what this looks like, to get involved with RCV, because it changes the landscape for us on the much needed state and local levels. So moving forward, we want to talk about the journey to RCV and running for office. So now we bring on Elizabeth Milson, former president of Fair Vote, Virginia, and state Senate candidate. How are you, Elizabeth?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, I have a windy path, but it did eventually lead me to advocating for ranked choice voting. I kind of lost myself in my, I guess, really late teens and early 20s to alcohol and substance abuse. I did what they call a geographic in the recovery community, where you think that you can solve your problems by moving to another state. So I came to Virginia, and wherever you go, there you are. So if you don't fix the problems that sent you on that path to begin with, they just find you again. So I stayed in contact with my supply in the state I moved from, and eventually got involved with a confidential informant and undercover officer, which resulted in a federal drug offense. And I spent just over 4 years on that sentence. And in 12/31/09, New Year's Eve of 09, turning to 2010, I was finally released from all those stages of incarceration. And in I worked my way. I went through the, the fits and starts of reentry and, getting my life back in order. And then I think it was 2014, about then, when Governor McAuliffe had changed the mechanisms for um, former offenders to be able to petition to get their civil rights back. And the civil rights, we know, are the right to vote, but it's also the right to serve on a jury, um, become a notary, and run for office. So I went through that process. It took many months, maybe a year, to finally get that letter in the mail that reinstated my rights. Eventually, I went on also to do the separate process of reinstating my firearms rights in Virginia only. And the first election after that was I think a Republican primary in my locality. And I did my research. I didn't know if I was a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, but I just wanted to vote. So I went and I read about the three candidates in this Republican primary, and I went and I voted. And then the next big election was 2016. So I did want to find out, which of these five candidates on the ballot in Virginia would, most align with how I felt. And so I took one of these long surveys and found that I aligned most with the minor party candidates. And so I got involved. I went and I met a candidate in Charlottesville, and I was real fired up. And I quickly learned how people feel about minor party and third party candidates. I was told that I was wasting my vote if I voted for one of these. And that hit really hard for me, because I thought, how dare you tell me that I am wasting this precious right that I've lost, I've had to work to get back, and now that I have the freedom to use again. And from following some of these same candidates, I was first introduced to ranked choice voting because, as Delegate Cole said earlier, ranked choice voting might help, get some more broad voices, even, maybe in a local election, getting an independent elected. So I found it really fascinating that not only could I use this right that is a human right that when it's taken away from, you really do feel less than. You feel that you're not part of the community anymore. So not only could you get this right back, but you could fully express it in a way that, makes it so that you don't have to choose of the lesser evils anymore. You can say, I like this candidate. I also like this candidate's ideas and this one. Because when you take these surveys online, they rank it for you. Oh, you most align with, this party, and then this party, and this party, and this party. And that just made sense to me, to going, oh, I don't fully align completely with any one candidate or party. So why wouldn't it make sense to, also rank how I align with these candidates on this ballot? So I tend to go fully into something when I get interested in it. Maybe I'm a little ADHD like that. But so I went fully into advocating for ranked choice voting. I found others. I spoke to my delegate, actually a Republican delegate. And in 2017, Delegate Freitas walked me through the process of how to be a citizen advocate. He said, explain that, calls are somewhat effective, emails least effective, a written letter is really effective, and a personal meeting is most effective. And then told me how subcommittees work, committees work, and he entered a bill for ranked choice voting in 2017 that was from local office, I think, all the way up to governor. And of course, it was a new idea, so it was shut down real early in subcommittee. But this was the first experience I had with coalition building, because here I was in a minor independent, leaning citizen working with a Republican, and finding where we aligned, because we were having these conversations and we were calling the same concepts by different terms, And then it took us a few sentences or paragraphs to be like, oh, hey, we're talking about this great novel idea, ranked choice voting. So I got in contact with other advocates or enthusiasts of this idea in Virginia. I spoke to Fair Vote National and formed a chapter of Fair Vote, the Virginia chapter. And eventually that's how I met Liz White, because we were doing the same advocacy work. We started working together more often with the same goal. And I actually eventually ran for office. I ran in 2023 as an independent candidate for state senate in the District 28. And it was, I was tilting at windmills. I was going up against a, 12, 13-year incumbent. And there was also a Democratic candidate. But I felt like I wasn't being heard. I felt like people in my community weren't being heard, and we weren't getting access. So I had to make my points a little clearer. And I got a very minimal percentage of the vote, but I got my ideas out there, our ideas. I got to talk about ranked choice voting and term limits and campaign finance reforms, other good governance reforms, the things that could really be transformative and help our government be more representative and bring down the temperature of the division. Now, today, I go back into jails voluntarily into our regional jail in Front Royal and teach yoga, mindfulness, and reentry tips. I got my yoga teacher training through Prison Yoga Project, and I'm currently in my second yoga teacher training through Recovery of Yoga. So that one correlates the 12-step program, Ayurvedic medicine, and yoga as a way to learn new skills and live with vitality and resist all the temptations that are out there, whether that's substance, alcohol, or all the distractions and consumerism that we wade through every day in life. So that's the very short version of my story. I hope it does inspire others to realize that your vote counts, your voice counts. I could have probably done a lot more before that, 5-10 year gap. But I didn't believe that my voice mattered. We have people like Taj that started organizations while they were on the inside. So we can all make an impact.
Wow. Elizabeth, this is probably my third time hearing you speak. And I learn something new every time I hear your story.
Thank you.
And one thing that I learned today is that I got ADHD because I went headlong into I went headlong. When I understood RCV, I went headlong into it, man. So thank you so much for that story. Now, this will be my second time hearing this young man, and I definitely want to coin him as the closer. Colin Cole, who is the Director of Advocacy, Outreach in Communities, and More Equitable Democracy. Colin, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Sean?
Wonderful, wonderful.
Happy to dive on in here. So
Please.
I'm gonna give a bit of a case study for looking further down the road. If I can find my proper screen here. There we go. So More Equitable Democracy is a racial justice organization, and we work to transform electoral systems to advance racial justice, thinking that it's not just an issue of electing better people or getting out the vote harder to advance the kind of racial justice policies we want to see in the world. It's a matter of changing systemic structural barriers. And so what I'd like to talk to you about today is this concept of proportional representation. I'm going to start off talking about it a bit in theory and then get more into the practice. So as the sort of bounding example, I'd like to have you imagine that we're as a group trying to decide what's for dinner. And let's say we have a big suite of options here. We have some seafood, we have a couple different meat options, we've got a wide variety of choices, and we might be asked as a group to vote for the one that you like best. Well, Liz already demonstrated perfectly well why that might be a bad problem. We might be stuck with something that maybe got the most votes, but also most people didn't want. And just hold that in the back of your mind. We'll come back to this question of what's for dinner. So electoral systems are made up of these three components, an electoral formula, the constituency, that's which voters are being represented. So do you have at-large elections? Do you have district elections? Do you have one representative like you do in the US House or two like you do in the US Senate? And then there's this ballot structure question. Do you vote by choosing one candidate? Do you rank? And so on. Zooming in on constituency here, this is the way that we traditionally measure the effectiveness of voting rights. And as a case study, we want to look briefly at Portland, Oregon. This is a heat map that shows you where people of color in Portland, Oregon live. And you can see it's the more warm colored regions, the yellower spots, the cooler colors, the blue spots are where it's mostly white folks. And you can see that there's not one hotbed of where people of color live in Portland. Now, there are parts of the country where there's really stark segregation, and you might have a bright red part of town, and sorry, I got it. A little meshes there. You might have a bright red part of town where all the people of color live, and a bright blue part of town where it's mostly white folks. But Portland and a lot of parts of the United States are decreasingly segregated in that way. And so, how does the Voting Rights Act come into this? The Voting Rights Act, for folks who surely everyone knows at least a little bit, but it's a landmark piece of legislation that was fundamental to establishing voting rights and meaningful representation for people of color throughout the United States. And the gut of it that we'd like to focus on is Section 2, which is the section that let you file a legal challenge to say, I think my voting rights are diluted in this city and I would like to sue for better protections. It's not perfect. What Section 2 has always required is that you have to show that there's geographic concentration, essentially segregation, in order to get into court. And it uses this winner-take-all system, this idea that the largest group is the group that can have the power to elect candidates of choice. And so in a district like this group of mostly white Mike Pence-looking guys are the largest group, so they have the power to elect all the candidates. And so the idea with a Voting Rights Act challenge is that you might be able to draw a district where the makeup of this pie chart looks a little bit different, and then as a result, different people can get elected. This idea of making a majority people of color district. But that doesn't always work in places like Portland, Oregon. We worked with a group called the Metric Geometry and Gerrymandering Group based out of Tufts University up in Massachusetts to analyze, could you draw a district in Portland that would give people of color the power to elect their own candidates using that Voting Rights Act standard? And the answer was basically no. In order for it to work, you'd have to draw a district that was majority people of color. The most you could do was this district that would be 34% people of color. If you went to 7, you could do this district. If you went to 9, you could do this. And they're all not a majority, so they don't pass that test. And they're really gerrymandered. They're hard to draw. They don't actually reflect what the city looks like. So it's not perfect. And to go back to that metaphor, it would be a bit like carving up that question of what's for dinner like this. And if you're a vegetarian and you live in District 1 or District 2 of the city, that doesn't really help you because you don't have a candidate that you can vote for. No matter who wins, you're not going to be able to eat. If you live in District 3, maybe you get a choice, but they're going to kind of win by default and they're not very inspiring. And maybe there's one competitive candidate over here, but it doesn't work if all of the vegetarians don't live in one district. That's sort of the shortcoming. So then we come to this question of changing ballots. And Liz, again, talked about this, about why choose one elections are a huge problem and why ranked choice voting has all of these benefits. It solves the spoiler effect. It helps elect more women and people of color. It can eliminate these unrepresentative primary elections, and it can help elect a wider array of more representative candidates, which therefore mean voters that are more on the fringes, that are more historically underrepresented, which includes justice impacted people, people of color, working class people, young people. They all are able to have a larger say in their elections, which is good. But these are still fundamentally winner take all elections, where if the largest set of folks want something, they're able to win every election. And as it happens, so imagine, if we were to go back to that first choice and said rank your choices, we might come up with a majority winner, a winner that most folks prefer. But if the majority are meat eaters and they choose a meat option, that minority of the population who are vegetarian or vegan, they still go hungry. Even if 65, 70% majority supported pepperoni pizza, that doesn't feel very good for that minority. And so this brings us to this question of electoral formula. Winner take all elections aren't the only type of elections. In fact, they in the world are the least common form of election. Most parts of the world use what's called a proportional election system. And if we talk about that, the idea there is that the elected body should look like the group of voters. So that group of mostly white, mostly Mike Pence looking guys, they're about 40% of this pie chart. So they should elect 40% of the city council, but they shouldn't elect all of the city council. And this group of folks in yellow, they're just 10% of the population. Under a winner take all system, it doesn't matter if it's ranked choice or choose one, they can't win anything. But under a proportional system, they can win 10% of the seats. And you can project different voting groups onto this pie chart. Maybe folks are voting based off of race, maybe it's party ideology, maybe it's the percentage of the population that are most disproportionately impacted by justice policies. And if we go back to this question of rank your choices, but now instead of letting one person win, we let 3 people win, the top 3 vote getters. Well, now you might get steak and pepperoni pizza and that falafel. And maybe the minority gets their fair share of representation and you still get to have majority rule. And Portland, Oregon actually adopted this very system 3 years ago, and they just used it for the first time. And they sort of took all this in as a concept, but then there's this question of, okay, but how do we know it's actually going to work for Portland? And the answer was through data. Through analyzing different ways the district maps could be drawn, projecting different outcomes, lots of data, lots and lots of data. We went through so many configurations of ifs and thans, and what about this and what about that? And the conclusion was that this system would work well. And so 17 of 20 Portland's Charter Review commissioners referred this to the ballot. And I know Portland has a reputation for being a lily white progressive liberal haven. But it ain't. 1 in 4 folks is a person of color, and it's historically been dominated by the center and center right at the city council level. And they embraced this change, which historically hasn't been used in the United States since the 1930s and 40s. It used to be widely used in places like New York, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, Ohio, and it was widely repealed in the 40s because of the Red Scare, because it was electing black people, and because it was electing immigrants and women. And folks are sort of rediscovering this potential. And what happened in Portland was the election of the most diverse city council in history. And I don't just mean diverse by any one metric. It's half men and half women, and a city council that has historically been dominated by men. You have people over the age of 60, which have always been on city council, but you also, for the first time ever, have someone under the age of 30. Often there would be one sort of tokenized person of color on city council. And now you have Black people, South Asian, East Asian, and Latino people all represented on city council, as well as your more expected representation for white voters. And there are also ideological representation. There are business folks who are endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce, and there are out socialists who are endorsed by the Working Families Party and are considered members of the left, and there's folks in the middle. So the result is, no matter what type of voter you are in Portland, whether you are on the right, on the left, in the middle, or if you hate the left and right debate, there's actually probably someone on city council that actually represents you. It's not just one type of city councilor anymore. And this is a system that Virginia can use because of that Virginia Voting Rights Act. So looking, or not, well, the Virginia Voting Rights Act and the local options bill that was passed by Delegate Cole. And here's what that might mean. Currently, looking at the congressional level, Virginia has 9 districts that are drawn like this. And if you think about those Portland maps I showed you before, these are a little bit gerrymandered. And maybe you could draw better maps. I know we've done our best to eliminate gerrymandering in Virginia, but there's only so much you can do. Under a proportional system, instead of having 9 districts, you could have 3 districts that each elect 3 people. And now you might have this district electing 2 Democrats and a Republican. Maybe this district elects 2 Republicans and a Democrat. Or maybe there's actually room for third parties, these smaller portions of the population that tend to be neglected and underrepresented, which also means members of the justice impacted community are going to be more likely to be able to have their fair share of representation in city council, in state legislatures, and in ultimately Congress if you choose to adopt it for that level of government, because now 10% of the population doesn't get nothing, they get 10% of the seats in city council. And through some analysis about how much power do different constituency groups have, we partnered with a group called Fair Vote to do some analysis of Virginia's population makeup, where people live. And in those districts, basically, white folks are the dominant majority in the vast majority of districts. And there's about 1 district that you can draw where a coalition of people of color have the power to win. But if you draw districts in that multi-winner configuration I showed earlier, now suddenly different groups of voters have the power to elect their fair share of candidates. And that's the power of combining ranked choice voting with proportional representation. And that's something that is possible in Virginia. It's possible through citizen initiative, through Voting Rights Act challenge, through a bunch of different avenues. And it's what really excites us at More Equitable Democracy about the future of electoral power, to not just be able to cast a vote, but to be able to cast a vote that matters, even if you're in the minority, still being able to win your fair share of representation.
Wow, Colin, listen. That's why you the closer. That's why you the closer, man. Hey, I love it, man. I love it. I love it when we can see what it actually looks like, what the work looks like, and what it looks like when it's done, right? So, thank you all for being on. Do we have, before we close out, do we have any questions from the audience? I know that I have one. So I'll start in case somebody else wants to come in. So I was actually looking over the Senate bill number 1009. And I know when we were incarcerated, as well as, and Taj can attest to this, as well as trying to go back with initiatives and things like that inside of the prison system, the first thing that administrations want to know is it safe? Can we do it? Is it safe? So the question I have is Section C. The state board shall provide standards for vote tabulating software for use with existing voting systems in elections conducted by ranked choice voting, which means that it's safe because, and Liz, I'm pretty sure that you can speak better to this about the system of how that system will look with tabulating software.
Sure. I think that's, I love that you're down in the nerdy weeds of that bill. Yeah, Arlington's already run a couple ranked choice voting elections. Charlottesville's gearing up. And I think that is something certainly that communities ask themselves when they're thinking of whether or not to adopt ranked choice voting. They're like, how is this going to work? Is this safe? Is this approved? No one wanted to be first. We're very, very grateful to Arlington and their fantastic registrar for taking on that responsibility. Part of this bill, these, kind of the nerdy middle part, is putting in the Virginia code, writing into law kind of best practices. So all the pieces of a good, smooth, safe, secure ranked choice voting election exist. This is, again, codifying them, making sure that everyone can see that, this is not being done willy-nilly. There are processes in place that work with Virginia's safe, secure elections that already exist.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for that explanation. Sure. Anyone else?
They're all experts. We did it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Taj, do you have any housekeeping items, sir?
Oh, first of all, I want to thank Liz and Elizabeth, you, Sean, Colin, thank you so much, and especially Delegate Cole for coming out tonight. I know this is not our normal thing as far as the clear connection to justice reform, but as we talked about at the beginning, and as we've said throughout, Colin, you made a really good point about this. The justice impacted community is never represented in voting the way that our interests actually are impacted by the government that is elected, right? Nobody's lives are more impacted by the laws, by who's in power, than people who are in the justice system, because it is literally your entire life. And everybody out there tonight, you just heard from Sean, you heard from Elizabeth, you're hearing from me, like, we all are in the, and we've all heard our friends and family saying, oh, there's no point in even voting. It's not going to get there. My vote doesn't matter. Nobody I vote for ever gets elected. It does anything I want. Well, the way to get past that is with ranked choice and proportional ranked choice voting. Like this is how we get representation that actually says, as Colin pointed out, if a substantial portion of Virginia is represented or includes people that are impacted by the justice system, that means that proportion in a proportional ranked choice voting system would have the votes in the actual whatever city council, legislature, whatever the body is, right? This is how our votes matter, which means this is how we're going to have an easier time passing the laws that we need for people in our community to have humane, compassionate treatment and a chance to earn their way home, right? This is the way to get our votes to matter, especially those of us who have been forever disenfranchised, as we talked about it. We can offer those PowerPoints that everybody showed. Liz, thank you. That was incredible. Colin, thank you also. Like, this is fantastic stuff. And we will have this live available for everybody. If you found this interesting, but you still have more questions, let us know. We will certainly point you in the direction of Liz or Sean or Colin or Elizabeth, whoever you want, or you can contact them directly. We will provide the information. Happy to share this, but send other people that if you've gotten your curiosity piqued, send other people to watch this. Because I really think, I'm not here telling you this just because it's some random thing that I found out about. I truly believe for our community especially, just like for all communities who are underrepresented, this is how your vote actually matters more, right? This doesn't have to be a partisan thing. As Elizabeth said, she felt like nobody represented her. That's why she believes in this. And I think a lot of us in the justice impacted community feel that way. Even Democrats at times have, and because often we draw that line, typically, that's something that people do. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but what I'm saying is even when we have one party that we often feel like has our interests more in mind, they still don't always, right? A single party is never going to represent our community fully, right? We need our community to be able to represent itself and to elect the people that we want. And this is the way to get there. So I'm going to, on that note, does anybody else how about everybody offer your last 30 seconds that you want to at the end of the night? I will sign off for that and just tell everybody real quick, come back in about 15 minutes and we will start our new live for the earned sentence credit explanation. I'll tell you how to make sure your voice gets heard on that. But for now, I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you all for coming out. Spread the word on this. I'm going to pass it back for everybody's last 30 seconds.
I'll say, listen, learn about RCV and vote your values. Thank you so much for having me.
I really, really appreciate everyone taking the time to learn about this. We often feel, on these democracy reform issues that we are just it's just math and it's just, nerdy election law stuff. And I truly believe it is the next step, building on the incredible work that groups like the Humanization Project and the entire justice reform community in Virginia, all of the work that is being done, this constitutional amendment, all of these other bills, and all these other fights to make sure everyone has the right to vote. I really think the next step is making sure that that vote counts as much as it can. So I thank you so much for making this and for making me part of this conversation.
Thank you, everybody. I'll jump in and I want to say that get involved in your community. Your voice does matter. And if you are in recovery or justice impacted, keep doing the next best thing that moves your life forward because there is life beyond the inside. And we need your voices. Thank you.
I just want to encourage folks to think up to know that this stuff is possible also. I know it's tempting to think, oh, this stuff sounds good, but it's never going to happen. People aren't going to vote for this. But we have seen in polls throughout the country, in places like Alaska and in Chicago and Portland and in the East Coast, that people are hungry for change, even big change. Actually, people are more excited for these big changes than they are tiny incremental little baby steps, because we know we need big problems to face our big solutions, or the opposite, that we have big problems and we need big solutions. So this stuff isn't just cool in theory. We can do it. You can do it, and we can all do it together.
Can I just jump in real quick and tack on to my cousin's statement? Colin, you're my cousin. You didn't even realize it. But he stated that we all can do this. And I think that's what is so important, that we realize that so many people are trying to divide us from accomplishing a gathered goal, right? And so they will divide us by poor folks, Black folks, Latino folks, whatever. But if we come together unified, we are absolutely able to change our communities. And like everyone has already said, it is possible when we come together. And so I want to encourage you to get over ourselves, to do what's right, to support each other, to fight for each other, and make sure we can make the changes in our community. Because the stuff you dreamed about is literally just a dream. If you put the work together, that dream will come a reality. And I'm living proof. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Have a good night, everybody. Take care.
Good night.